Since earliest memories, our lives touch and are touched by countless people and animals. Most of the time, these interactions, whether brief or extended, can be pleasant and meaningful. But sometimes, experiences with others can be uncomfortable, cruel, abusive. We generally choose to treat others fairly and with respect, recognizing ourselves in other beings, human or non-human, treating others as we ourselves would want to be treated. But some people, for a variety of reasons, abuse their own children, spouses, other family members, as well as strangers and animals. Sometimes, the person or animal being victimized is killed by the abuser. It may not always be clear just what constitutes abuse. Certainly, there are the obvious examples, but abuse can take different forms.
My assumption about abuse was that it needed to be something you could see. You know, it's the black eye, it's the broken arm. And it happens to people who are not like me. You know, I'm a middle-class, educated person.
The abuse may take the form of verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical or sexual abuse, economic control, using children, using pets, using personal property.
That's huge, to first recognize that abuse can take more than one form. Anytime that you feel like someone is taking advantage of you, anytime you feel you've been lied to or used or played the fool.
Some abuse is unintentional. For example, the result of ignorance or lack of education on the part of a pet owner. It could be the dog that wasn't kept in a fenced yard or inside the home that ran away and ingested poison. Or the Cocker Spaniel that went without grooming for over a year. All too often, though, abuse is inflicted on animal or human, or both, with intent to harm. Victims of such abuse can be of any age, gender, or species. Just how do we learn to interact with people and other living things? How do we become exposed to violence? Who becomes an abuser? Who becomes the victim of the abuser? And what can you and I do about it?
Well, a teenager is in a really difficult spot. You think you're pretty grown up. You think you're almost a man or a woman, and you're still treated like a kid. You're expected sometimes to have the responsibilities. Maybe it's your responsibility to take care of the dog or the cat or the pet, whatever pet you have in the house. And who's taking care of you? Because you're still a kid and you still have needs.
Families, friends, peer groups, and society in general all have an impact on the development of our attitude toward others. Some of us already know about abusive behavior from first-hand experience. We may have been exposed to abuse by a family member or another person close to us.
Abusers aren't always who we think they might be. Abusers come from every walk of life, all socioeconomic levels, educations, professions, cultures, races.
Perhaps we know someone who's already abused animals or other people in some way. Possibly this person was himself or herself victimized at one time and is now in danger of perpetuating the cycle of violence. Maybe we're a little uneasy about a developing relationship at school.
Often you see a lot of jealousy in an abusive relationship, a lot of trying to control your behavior, what you're trying to do if someone is being abusive to you. Some of the signs in a relationship may seem like things that that are helpful, walking you home from school every day, coming to meet you at your locker between classes, calling you on the phone, wanting to know where you are at all times. Often those are things that are controlling and lead further along to more controlling behavior.
Some of us may be familiar with institutionalized abuse or cruelty, like dogfights or cockfights. This pit bull was rescued after being used as bait to train other pit bulls to fight more aggressively. And we've all been exposed to acts of violence on television and in the movies, though most of us realize there's a world of difference between so-called Hollywood violence and real-life violence. In movies and TV and in video games, we rarely get to see the real consequences of violence, the real pain and suffering.
When we talk about the cycle of abuse, we're talking about a problem that's not just a people problem, and it's not just an animal problem. It's a violence problem. Because violence is violence, and abuse is abuse, whether it's perpetrated against a child, against a spouse, or against an animal.
So why do some people start abusing animals in the first place? One reason has something to do with control. A person who perhaps feels powerless may find it easier to control an animal by abusing it than to control his own family or his immediate environment. Sometimes a person will abuse an animal for the sheer shock value of the action, one of several ways he attempts to show he rejects societal values. This young cat was doused with gasoline, set on fire, and thrown out of a window by a teenaged boy. Or a person who one day gets bitten or scratched by an animal, like the neighbor's cat, may feel compelled to retaliate and hurt that animal. In some cases, this person may continue to abuse cats in general because he's now developed a prejudice against the species. Sometimes people adopt abusive behavior because they want to fit in with a group. The need for acceptance may be so strong that someone who normally would never harm another person or animal may give in to peer pressure and actually commit an act of violence against another living thing. Other types of animal abuse can be more complicated and can involve other people in addition to an animal. For example, a person may threaten to hurt or kill someone's pet as a way of controlling that person, a familiar tactic in many domestic violence situations.
He turned around and he says, "I could do that to you, just throw you against the wall sometimes." And I thought, there's something wrong here. We were talking about rice and potatoes 5 minutes ago, and now you're throwing the cat. Help me understand that.
A key element found in most cases of animal abuse and human abuse involves this imagined sense of power, the illusion of power on the part of the perpetrator.
Violence is about power and control. It's one person using different forms of control, different forms of abuse to control another.
Such a need for power, so strong that it causes a person to violate another living being, often comes from an extreme lack of control in some area of that person's life.
I didn't want her growing up seeing her mom abused, physically abused, because by the time I got ready to leave the situation, it had progressed from emotional, spiritual, financial abuse and had started to encompass physical abuse.
Breaking the cycle of abuse can seem next to impossible to someone who's caught up in it. If you are involved in such a situation, or if you suspect that someone you know is involved, either as an abuser or as a victim, there are a number of things you can do. First of all, it's important to recognize that an abusive situation does indeed exist. Threats to a person or an animal are not acceptable. Abuse of a person or an animal is unacceptable and against the law. Remember that every choice you make leads you down a particular path, even if that choice is to take no action at all. You may choose the path that leads deeper into the cycle, or the one that finally manages to break it. You may want to first talk to someone you trust, a counselor, for example, or a teacher, an uninvolved family member, coach, religious advisor, about a situation you're involved in, or about a friend's predicament. This initial action may lead to another choice, and one of the most difficult of all, actually reporting the abuse. Though this may seem distressing at the time, it's important for all involved for you to take a stand and act, realizing that any repercussions that may occur would be far less devastating than allowing the abuse to continue.
If you think that you are in an abusive relationship or that someone you know is in an abusive relationship, reach out. You need to call a hotline. Most cities have local programs. There's also a national hotline.
It's a national number, so it's for domestic violence, it's for dating violence. And these, when you call this 800 number, there are people there that are trained, that have experience in your type of situation.
And you may want to think about things such as younger brothers and sisters, pets that are in the house, the parent that may be hurt. You may want to think about getting yourself and your younger siblings out of the house at a time of an abusive situation, and then calling for help for your parent.
Animal shelters or animal control agencies can also be contacted regarding the abuse of pets. Reports to all of these agencies can usually be made anonymously. It's also important to understand why someone would feel they had to remain in an abusive situation. Leaving can be hard and sometimes dangerous. Some victims blame themselves.
I think it's always important to remember, if you have been hurt, if your parent, your siblings, your pet has been hurt by someone else, you are never at fault. You are never to blame for someone else's violence.
Part of it is that you think that that's, that this is not abuse. You don't think that you're being abused. This is normal. This is the way you saw your mom and your dad react when you were growing up. So it's not abusive. You don't think it is until you start talking to other people and you realize, everybody doesn't live like this. You also feel a lot of fear. The fear of the unknown. Okay, so if I get out of this relationship, then what? I'm out of the pan into the fire. And it's that fear of getting out, of not knowing what to expect afterwards. It says, okay, well, this is comfortable. I know what this is. I can deal with what I've got because I know what it is. Don't like it, but I know what it is.
Most ironic and tragic of all, a victim's desperate need to feel wanted may be exploited by the abuser, who knows just which emotional buttons to push and when to keep the victim coming back. Learning how to identify and build positive relationships, therefore, can go a long way toward recognizing and breaking free of destructive interactions. Unfortunately, there are no miracle solutions, no instant cures to patterns of abuse. However, each and every action taken, each step along the path leading away from abuse, is a step toward ending the abuse. Sharing your worries with someone is often a very helpful first step. It's important to recognize patterns of cruelty and abuse early in a child's life. Most children develop a healthy curiosity and respect for the world around them. But in extreme cases, patterns of cruelty toward animals can be an early indicator of a highly disturbed individual. Some of the most notorious serial killers had a history of animal abuse.
And unfortunately, the reality is, if you are abused, you eventually become the abuser. And what is easier to abuse than a small animal, than a kitten? I had a case not too long ago where This little girl, who could be on a calendar picture or on a greeting card, had been abused sexually by her mother's boyfriend, and took 2 little kittens that were around the house and dropped them down an elevator shaft.
Humane educators around the country go into classrooms, they talk to students about different animal issues. Oftentimes we will hear stories from children talking about different abuse that they've seen or even abuse that they've participated in. Occasionally, the educators will go up to the teachers and bring this to the teacher's attention, saying that there might be a problem here, either with the student or else maybe in the student's home. Sometimes the teachers listen because they do understand that there is a connection here between animal abuse and human abuse. Sometimes the teachers don't. Sometimes they'll talk about, oh, that's just Jimmy, that's just the way he is, or boys will be boys, or it's just a dog, or it's just a cat.
But it's more than just an animal. And if we don't, I know Margaret Mead had said a long time ago, when a child first in innocence hurts an animal, if they get away with it, they'll go on to do more damage.
When teachers don't take this seriously, when they don't look into it, they may be letting an opportunity slip by where they could intervene and possibly help out the child or help out the family and help out the animals in that home.
Certainly not everyone who abuses an animal will go on to abuse human beings. But patterns of animal abuse often do lead to other types of violence, like vandalism, assault, and in the case of this high school, arson. For this reason, any act of violence should be brought to the attention of someone you trust or reported to the proper authorities. By intervening early, future violence may well be prevented.
Just like you respect mom and dad, because mom and
It's
dad
difficult to describe and define terms such as love, abuse, humane, cruelty, respect.
Imagine how your parents feel.
Yet these terms must be better defined and understood so that society can more effectively address the problems of abuse and violence.
At school, we're picking on you or hurting you or not treating you the way that they treat you.
There was one time where, one of my pits got stolen from me. I didn't know where it was at. So one day I was throwing out the garbage and there was a pit fight. So I go on, let me go see what that is. What do I see? I see my dog is fighting. I'm like, what? That's the dog that they stole from me.
One time they took a cat that I was...
When given the opportunity, talk about your own experiences, express your own views, your own feelings, and be willing to listen to other points of view as well.
Because I love dogs, and I don't think they should use a pit bull just to fight. I think a pit bull is it's a normal dog, and you should treat it like a normal dog with respect.
They came, they took him to the hospital. The dog didn't survive, That made me feel bad. But still, it still doesn't make me stop loving pit bulls, because for the simple reason is that they think that it's a pit bull and it has to fight. Well, it ain't like that,
We must recognize that no act, positive or negative, exists in a vacuum. All abuse is connected and leaves its collective mark on the rest of society.
It's important to remember that every act of violence, whether it's against human or non-human, diminishes society. It takes away from all of us. And that's why it's really important to take a stand against violence, to take action against violence.
Any action you and I can take to thwart the cycle of abuse is significant and valuable. One way to help victims in general is to volunteer our time at a domestic violence shelter, an animal welfare organization, or a youth program. To help someone we know, like a friend or a family member, just being available for support and guidance can make the difference in stopping the abuse that person may be suffering.
Humane societies deal with animal abuse. There are other agencies that deal with child abuse and spousal abuse. These agencies can get together, they can pool their resources, And when we do that, when we address the cycle of abuse from all sides of the problem, it's only going to help the solution. It's only going to help us break through the cycle of abuse more effectively.
You can make a phone call. You can report it to a teacher. Teachers are wonderful reporters. They help kids by reporting information of behavior that isn't right to the proper authorities where people can get help. Someone who hurts an animal deliberately needs help. The animal needs help, but so does the person who does this. And you can take the control and you can take the power into your own hands by making sure the cycle of abuse stops. Because it's sometimes too late for a parent. It's too late for many adults. It's not too late for you.
Whether abuse is being perpetrated upon a person, or an animal, or both, intervention is critical. By recognizing the abuse of others, by understanding its causes, by realizing that both abuser and victim need help before it's too late, you and I have the power to take action and destroy the cycle once and for all.